So just to introduce Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, who's joining us now also, and she's one of Britain's greatest Paralympic athletes. In 2005, she became Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson for services in sport, and in 2010, she was conferred as Baroness Grey-Thompson also. She is Crossbench member of the House of Lords, a leading disability rights activist, and one of the UK's most respected voices on public policy. She has 11 Paralympian gold medals, and she has been a long-time campaigner on issues affecting people with disabilities and access to care, autonomy, safeguarding, and so forth. And so she has been quite prominent in the recent debate regarding the change in laws in the UK. So just firstly, a welcome, and I'd just like to ask Baroness Grey-Thompson if you could tell us maybe about how the legislation is evolving in the UK and just kind of what are the drivers behind it, and if you could maybe inform our audience.
Very much. Good evening. I've put my email address in the chat as well, if anyone wants to follow up afterwards. How much time have I got?
We have another 20 minutes, but we're going to have a...
Okay, thank you. Coming back from where I was brought, time limits are really good because I can talk for hours on this. So if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I would have said, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a brilliant idea. You know, people shouldn't suffer, put them out of misery. You know, suffering's awful. And, you know, we take greater care with our dogs, which is, and our animals. This is something that we get thrown at us a lot of the time. So where we are at the moment is the bill has passed through the House of Commons. It is a private member's bill. It is not in the government manifesto. It is not any part of their plans. But fairly publicly, the people who have supported this bill have been really open about the amount of support that it's received from government departments. So Kim Leadbeater took it through the Commons, and now Lord Faulkner is taking it through the Lords. And it's not the first attempt. And we're kind of frequently told if we don't do it right now, then we're not going to discuss it for another 10 years. The reality is this comes up every couple of years. So there's been lots of attempts in previous years, all through private members' bills or an attempt to amend an NHS bill to bring this in. So what we've been told as it exited the Commons is that it's had 100 hours of debate. It's more debate than pretty much any other bill. The Children's Wellbeing in School Bill went through the Commons in about 40 hours. And also we've been told that this bill has more safeguards than any other bill anywhere in the world. It is a really low bar on safeguards, especially when you look at Canada, where now you've got people requesting it for being poor, for being homeless, for being disabled. You mentioned Chris and Gauthier. So the supporters of legislation sort of mostly started off saying Oregon was a great idea. Then for a bit, they all said Canada was a great idea until Canada just expanded so much. And they're now moving back to Oregon, and we'll quote the numbers there. And there's a few who kind of talk about Australia and New Zealand, but those are really recent additions to the assisted dying legislation. But already New Zealand has come in with pretty high figures in the first sort of years of operation. What we do have to remember with Oregon, when they talk about numbers, Oregon is a tiny US state. It is absolutely a couple of million people. So the numbers don't seem bad when you think actually Oregon is smaller than Wales. What we think the numbers could be in the UK could be up to sort of 10,000 people a year. And what's really hard is the other side, and I'm not fundamentally against this ever, we've got to look at the legislation that's in front of us. And I think the legislation in front of us is really weak. There are 42 things that go to secondary legislation, which means the Secretary of State decides them. They never come back to Parliament, which is things like what drugs are going to be used. Some of the other weaknesses in it are around how you talk to someone with learning disability. An amendment to give additional training got voted out. Dr. Keller said, you know, about the training that's received. It's pretty minimal. The same thing around coercion. The doctor in this bit of legislation only has to be reasonably assured that there's no coercion. And I went to a meeting that was attended by Australian doctors who provide voluntary assisted dying. And I was really uncomfortable actually with the conversation where they said every death is painless and lovely, and it's a privilege to be around. And there's never any complications. But we know with data in Oregon, time of death, the longest is 137 hours. I think that's like 8 shifts of doctors. So, what we're being painted is 2 doctors, settled wish, 6 months diagnosis, really easy soundbite. I have currently 700 pages of data to go into the next stage, was the committee stage, which shows, why it is not as simple and easy as that. So I believe there's loads of gaps in the legislation, the bill, sorry. I'm tabling lots of amendments around disabled people. And I just want to really cover that quickly. As a disabled person, I have more privilege than any other disabled person I know. And I know a lot of disabled people. And I have to say, Kevin Fitzpatrick, I counted as a very dear friend of mine who helped me very early in my career many times. But we live in a society where disabled people experience discrimination in healthcare, housing, employment, education, you name it. It's there. And I think a lot of disabled people are really worried because although we're told it's not disabled people, Lord Faulkner's 2012 commission said it is not intended for disabled people at this moment in time. And so if your life is unbearable because you can't get care, because you can't get support, because you're living in horrible housing, because you don't have the right continence products, life becomes unbearable. And I think that is a real worry to me, that every jurisdiction has changed over time, either through the courts or through it going back through Parliament, sometimes in quite subtle ways. But that's why disabled people are really concerned. There is no organisation of or for disabled people that supports this. And I've only had 10 disabled people write to me to say they think this is a good idea. And I've had hundreds who are worried about this. So where we are, we've got through second reading. That took place over 2 days. There were originally 190 speakers on the list. And we now go into committee where we do line by line appraisal of the bill, and we look to how we can amend it. So we're told, it's the will of the Commons, we shouldn't throw it out. There is nothing to say that we can't stop the bill. We haven't stopped it yet. There will be people who may be trying to stop it, but maybe people who try to amend it. But actually what we need is to be able to do our job and go through it line by line. But it's a pretty worrying time, actually, in terms of where we are, that we're not, having a discussion about palliative care training, funding. There's a number of hospices even this week who've had their funding slashed. And I think this is, probably say, I'm bound to say this, it doesn't feel like this is the right moment in time to be talking about ending people's lives when we're not talking about all the other things that we could put in place to make life better for disabled and for everybody. Final thing I'm going to say is just we don't talk about death, in the UK. And I think people are frightened I'm frightened about how I'm going to die, but I still don't think this is a good idea. And it was a colleague of mine that said a little while ago, where there's a will, there's a relative. And that is something that just sticks with me all the time in terms about how we treat people and how we support them. And, I think there's a lot more things that we could do. This could be at some point part of a end of life care, but to me it would have to be end of life, right at the end of life. I don't think this is a great idea for where we are as a society right now. And I'll stop talking there, but very happy to follow up with anyone afterwards.
Thanks so much. And we just